We're going to talk about empathetic engineering through InnerSource. I gave this talk at the InnerSource Commons Fall Summit, and honestly, a lot of folks were really interested in learning more. We really, given our current climate, we need to foster compassionate, inclusive, and collaborative technologies. The times are changing, and I think that we need to kind of adjust how we are going to be facing things and also facing things within the ever-changing landscape of software. So a little bit about me, right? I live in Cleveland, Ohio, in the United States. I'm affiliated with InnerSource Commons, To Do Group, Finos. I went to Temple University in Philadelphia. Avid Cleveland Browns fan. I know it's very silly, but American football, Cleveland Browns, I love them. It's weird. They're not very good, but that's okay. And I love pinball. Pinball is just so fun. Right. So let's just kind of get into it. What are you going to learn today, right? Why are you here? What brought you to this session? We really want to explore how inner source principles can be leveraged to enhance empathetic engineering practices. We want to create technology that's user-centered, ethical, and inclusive, right? We really, while you're here, you're going to understand the concept of empathetic engineering and defining it in a way that's going to be addressing the user's needs, emotions, and experiences, because we are developing, so we want to address those needs for folks and their experiences, because that's really important. We're going to really dig into deep to open source collaboration principles. That's really, where a lot of inner source practices come into play. And then when they're applied within organizations, they really promote transparency, inclusivity, and innovation. I'm going to share how we could demonstrate some practical applications, right? I'm going to show how real examples of inner source driven empathetic engineering has been impactful from all different places across the globe, which is interesting. And, providing actionable strategies. I want to ensure that we're going to give practical steps for applying inner source practices into your daily workflows and really engaging our leadership team. So the most important thing to address with change is we have to have leadership on board. So excuse me, I have a sip of water. All right. And feel free throughout the course of this presentation to put any questions in the chat, okay? What is empathetic engineering, right? It's the growing need for user-focused ethical technologies, right? Empathetic engineering prioritizes the user's needs, emotions, and experiences. And, technology built with empathy does benefit users and fosters stronger user relationships. So in action, right? Talking about empathetic engineering, we really want to talk about the overall impact. So let's talk about how things were designed from an empathetic space, right? Actually listening and garnering. Inner source really facilitates rapid innovation within accessibility. Look at, for example, Apple and Microsoft accessibility features. It's very interesting. You have human-centered healthcare. So collaborative engineering helps build the tools that are considered both physical and emotional needs. And in order to do that, you're really kind of leaning in to the end user experience. And then, you have social good initiatives like Google's Project Loon to show how collaborative efforts can tackle global challenges and improve connectivity. So we're going to come back a little bit more, and everything's going to harken back to empathetic engineering in action and how you can apply it into your day-to-day. Inner source, what do I always say? I think it is the coolest way to develop. You have your core principles, even starting, inner sources, applying those open source methodologies within your organization to enhance collaboration and software development. And then within these core principles, you do have this concept of openness, ensuring that things are easily discoverable and well documented, allowing any team member to find and contribute to these projects across any particular organization and or space contributes them with minimal barriers, and it's really helpful. And transparency, so maintaining that clear communication about project directions, feature requirements, and decision-making processes, and really having a clear roadmap, asking for what could potentially be needed, right? So that's really important. You have prioritized mentorship, which is very important, that host teams can actively mentor contributors from other teams, facilitating knowledge and transferring those to foster that collaboration and collaborative environment. We also have this concept of volunteerism, right? So voluntary code contribution, encouraging team members to contribute the code voluntarily, really ensures that the contributions will align to the team's objectives and the contributor's goal. And one of the things that, we're really kind of honing in on all of this is communication, right? By embracing these types of principles, organizations are able to break down silos, promote that code reuse, and cultivate that culture of continuous improvement, which is always hearkening back to the solution and project at hand. So how do these practices enhance one another, right? So InnerSource and empathetic engineering. So there's three principles for these connections, right? Collaboration. That cross-team collaboration, it really enhances and broadens perspectives that enrich the understanding of the diverse user needs. So that's very important. Sometimes when we're developing, we can kind of get stuck in our own little silos and in our own way, and we're hearing our own ideas, but we're not necessarily opening it up. So that can lead to, not a very collaborative environment. So it's good to open yourself up to that. Transparency, right? So openly sharing processes and outcomes does foster empathy. You're allowing your engineers to see that user impact, right? So also inclusivity, encouraging participation from diverse backgrounds ensures that solutions reflect that wide range of user experiences, what you are actually looking for when you're going through this. So InnerSource, really, it's just the best practice of applying these principles and then driving that empathy and bringing together those diverse internal teams to work together on shared goals is really, really, really important. So the importance of InnerSource driven empathetic engineering, user satisfaction, that continuous feedback loop, which sometimes we often miss, helps teams understand and meet the real user's needs. We have to continuously feedback. And I know sometimes in our organizations, potentially it sometimes seems like we're yelling into a vacuum and maybe not getting that feedback back that you actually need. So, thinking through, which I'm sure we'll chat about later, what sort of ways can you encourage folks to open up, right? That really kind of harkens back to your project initiation, like what am I trying to solve here? So equity and accessibility, very important because those perspectives promote those inclusive and accessible solutions because sometimes, we can't get out of our own way. So it's really important to open up. And then ethical responsibility, right? Transparency encourages team members to consider all ethical implications openly. So applying it, let's apply empathetic engineering practices through InnerSource. So active listening through collaborative platforms. So using collaboration tools, shared repositories, internal forums can really help gather user feedback in real time. So that's very good. That's what we really want. And then, these platforms, enable our engineers to listen to the users directly and understand their unique experiences and challenges. So not only are we developing with a diverse range of teams through InnerSource, we're engaging those customers every step of the way, which is very important, right? The benefits too, active listening through those open channels fosters empathy to allow engineers to immediately identify user pain points, leading to more relevant solutions. And then building diverse engineering teams. From an engineering team that represents a range of skills, they all have different backgrounds and perspectives. So having a diverse team really brings that broader range of insights into your design process, reducing the risk of bias and helping address the needs of different user groups, right? So it's very important. Also, these perspectives ensure that technology is accessible and inclusive and respectful of various cultural and individual experiences. Fostering that open knowledge sharing is very important. So encouraging your engineers to share their knowledge, tools, and resources across teams, making these insights accessible for everyone. Open knowledge sharing practice like documentation and wikis make it easier for our engineers to learn from each other and build on past solutions. And, building that culture of shared learning, teams are better equipped to empathize with users accessing a wealth of insights. So, what else can we do with this, right? So, collaboration, openness, transparency. Well, let's talk about creating those user personas. Develop user personas as a team to represent those different user groups, capturing both the practical and emotional needs. By collaboratively defining personas, all team members will gain a shared understanding of who the users are and what challenges they face. The benefits are really important because the personas provide a clear human-centered focus, allowing your engineers to empathize more deeply with users, tailoring that, that continuous feedback loop. Regular feedback loops are so important, like user testing sessions, surveys to gather on, like right as you're developing that input from your users and internal stakeholders. That ensures that the products are refined and improved based on the evolving user needs and experiences. The benefits, with regular feedback loops allow teams to make those empathy-driven adjustments over time, creating products that adapt to changing needs. Because sometimes we start one way, but we all know with software development, it can change, so adapting is very important. And then open discussions are very important of ethical considerations. Facilitating transparent discussions, facilitating around the ethical implications of design and development choices really evaluates the societal impact of the work. So your teams can become more informed, ethically creating those sound decisions. And the benefit of all of this is ensures that the technology development respects the user's rights, mitigates risks, and aligns with social values by fostering a responsible approach to innovation. So how do we take these core principles and apply them to empathetic engineering, right? Open collaboration, encouraging that cross-functional, enabling engineers to work openly across teams supports the empathy by exposing our folks to different perspectives, real user stories to foster a better understanding. Also ensuring that all team members have visibility into the engineering process from initial ideation to the feedback and duration. And transparency allows those engineers to fully understand the impact of their work. User-centered designs are so important, and we just have to be mindful of how we do develop that. And then what's really important too is establishing a culture where everybody does feel a shared responsibility to contribute regardless of their formal role in a project. The community mindset always enhances empathy as team members are encouraged to consider how their contributions will impact the actual collective user experience. Always having a shared ownership model where engineers feel accountable for the quality and inclusivity of the project. And empathy is reinforced as teams collectively focus on creating the meaningful and accessible inclusive solutions that genuinely meet what is needed. And then creating mechanisms for ongoing user feedback and refinement. Iterations happen, and they're going to happen quite a bit. So yes, it is very, very interesting stuff. And then, so then how do we engage leadership? We have to present the business value, highlight how empathy drives higher user satisfaction, increases loyalty, and reduces costly redesigns, because what you're doing is you're meeting the real user needs from the start. Showcase really successful good case studies where InnerSource has led to meaningful user-centered innovations. Going back to my slide, assistive healthcare, app, the accessibility advancements in Apple, so it's very important because you're showcasing that this does work. Aligning your strategic goals, connect InnerSource to empathetic engineering to the organization's goals for innovation, inclusivity, and social responsibility. Encourage your leadership to participate, right? Invite your leaders to attend a collaborative session so they can see this entire feedback review firsthand of the value of empathy-driven engineering. And then, of course, always promoting that culture of collaboration. Emphasize that leadership support for InnerSource fosters a culture where open communication, transparency, and diverse ideas drive both product and team success. So as we wrap up, oh, pardon me. Um, Inner source, it's one of the most powerful frameworks for core development, right? You're embedding empathy into engineering because you are taking those diverse perspectives. You're creating products that are user-centered, ethical, and inclusive. One of my call to actions is really embrace these principles to really level up your user-centered tech landscape. And future visionings like integrating inner source with empathetic engineering will foster a technology industry that is compassionate, inclusive, and responsive to the needs of our diverse users. And I think that as we move forward, we really need to start hearkening back to the compassionate side. We need to hearken back to, being responsive. We have to drive and lead with this particular sort of space. And so with that, that's it. That's all I have today. It's a brief kind of philosophy of, empathy and how we can drive everything into that sort of space. So I'm going to stop my share here and just say thank you all very much.